Welcome everyone to the webinar with the topic Talking the Values versus Walking the Values, where we are going to kick off the insightful discussion on interdependence between values, organizational success, and sustainable growth. So my name is Slađana Imamović, and I'm an organizational culture consultant, and I will be your host today. What we do in HR Xcel is helping organizations to diagnose and level up their culture through Barrett methodology. As a Barrett Value Center practitioner, I have been into different projects where this topic has been recognized to have a huge impact on business and HR field as well. And that is why we have invited Jay Skinner, and it's my pleasure, to join us and share her perspective on this topic. And so we are going to discover, do we only talk about the values or we really live by them? So let me introduce her to you. Jay is a founder of Values Practice Ltd. She's an experienced cultural transformation leader and consultant. She developed her international perspective during 7 years with the Barrett Value Center, where for the last 2 years, she served as Director of Consulting, contributing to cultural transformation programs for clients, such as the NHS, PwC, Kuwait Bank, Bhopal. She has also led multiple international and regional conferences on the theme of values-driven leadership at the level of teams, organizations, and nations. So welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much, Slađana, and hello, everyone. An honor to be here, and also to work with you, Slađana, in co-creating, what we would cover today. Some really great questions and lots that we've got to share with you. So,
Yes, thank you. And just a few additional bits of information about the webinar. This will be a dialogue between the two of us, Jay and me, with some highlights in slides being shared on screen. You will receive a copy of the slides afterwards as a toolkit. Also, throughout the webinar, you will have the opportunity to post your questions in the Q&A section. Given the time framework, any questions that are raised and not being answered during the session will be answered via post-event link that we are going to share with you in the chat box before the end of our webinar today. And we are willing to continue and deepen the conversation with you on this topic, which is why we are opening this channel as well. And this link will stay open for you after the webinar has been closed until Monday noon. We will be happy to answer all your questions there you raised. So I think that we can dive into the topic now. Are you ready, Jay?
As ever, I will be. Yes, let's go.
So the organizational culture is becoming the key topic in business tables and HR conferences nowadays. Its power is to move the organization forward or to be regressive and pull it backward, no matter what agile technologies, methodologies, or processes we implement. But first, let's clarify the meaning of the word itself and the context where it exists. So we know that there are many definitions. Which definition do you find serve best?
Great. So for me, the best definition for talking about culture is quite simple. Culture is the way things get done. And what I like about that is it gets straight to the point that culture is not a nice idea or an aspiration. It's actually what's driving what is happening in your organization in every day. So there are theoretical definitions like culture is a set of shared values, goals, attitudes, and practices that characterize an organization. And that is fair to say, but I think it weakens the importance of what culture is about if you suggest it just characterizes the organization, because to my mind it makes or breaks the organization. So I think it's more accurate to say that culture, if you're describing it as shared values, attitudes, assumptions, practices, determines the future of an organization.
Yeah. So you mentioned, and it is the fact that it seems that it strongly influences what people do or do not do. Is it right?
Yeah, absolutely. So just noticed I didn't click through the slides that go with so let me just come back to doing that. And I think it's just come off SlideShare as well. Let me put that back on.
Yeah.
So and go to the next slide. It must have been jumped to the end. So on the way things get done, I'm just illustrating the different ways to approach things with that slide. And on the question you just asked me, Stjana, about culture influencing what happens. Yes, there's all sorts of elements, norms, processes, patterns, systems, behaviors. I didn't click on that. I don't know why my computer just took us forward. Or my hands weren't even on the desk. So we've got IT gremlins. I will try and control them. There are many elements basically of culture that influence what's happening, and the resulting is the context for everything that occurs in an organization. So that culture directly influences what people believe is possible, and every decision and action will occur in that context. Mm-hmm. Some of what is influencing is visible above the line, and you can see ideas of that on the slide, and some of it's invisible below the line, stuff that we can only uncover if we listen deeply and talk deeply about that.
Yeah. So in the past, we have considered culture to be a soft stuff, nice to have, right?
Yeah.
But not necessarily. What do we understand now?
So it's increasingly become clear and published in all sorts of reports and magazines now that culture is the hard stuff, and that really that sense of reality that guides people about what they do. And so it's a predictive indicator of the future of your business success and sustainability. Whereas traditionally, the more obvious thing was to manage the tangible assets of an organization. There's more to be gained, it's recognized, by managing the soft stuff if you're managing culture there. And you can see that reflected as in the way that competitive advantage is being measured now in terms of on these S&P 500, the stock markets in America that look at the average of the stock market by the top 500 companies. 84% of the value of the way of the value of those companies is now the measurement of intangible assets. So, and that's gone up. It's since 1975 when it was something like 17%. So a massive shift has happened towards recognizing the importance organizationally of the value of business. So it's really about lifting the bar for what's possible in the organization and realizing, releasing potential to surpass historical limits. Yeah, so that's what we understand now about it. And
if it is about what people do or do not do, then could we say that organizational culture is a competitive advantage nowadays, and why? And how else does culture give an organization a competitive advantage?
Okay, so as again, looking at the slide there, you can see that the annual returns for best companies to work for are 4 times that of the average company in S&P. So yes, it's clearly recognized that competitive advantage is created by good places to work for and cultures. And what's happening here is that a healthy culture brings out the best in people and attracts the best people. And that in turn creates all sorts of efficiencies and benefits. So Dan, if I asked you, where would you rather work? An organization that's making a difference, has integrity, teamwork, fun, quality and ethics, or somewhere where there's blame culture, buck passing, short-term focus and information hoarding, which would you choose?
Thank you for asking. I would rather choose the first offer.
Yeah. Oh, and wouldn't we all? And the point here is that so your customers will choose the company that they would rather be in relationship with. So will your investors. So will your providers. And in essence, if you have a healthy culture, you're going to get the best competitive advantage because you're going to attract the best people. Not only that, you're going to save money on the costs of having a bad culture. So employee retention. Recruiting, if you're losing talent because of poor culture, that there's a cost in replacing that talent.
Mm.
Also, if you're not retaining customers, then you don't have happy customers and good loyalty, you're losing future profits and grow the opportunity to grow your product streams and so on. So there's real tangible benefits to a healthy culture.
It may seem obvious, but the thing worth noticing here is that a healthy culture is a place where people are engaged and participative in a contributory way, right?
Definitely. So employee engagement occurs where there's healthy culture, and the result is performance improvement with real added value. So the more that the culture gives people that opportunity to authentically engage, they will shift from complying and just achieving the targets that are put on them to actually adding value and making a real difference. And this has been recognized through research done with 163 companies by Hewitt & Associates and the Barrett Values Centre, which showed that positive relationship between a healthy culture and engagement was a strong correlation.
Yeah. Now let's focus on financial services, because of the fact that if culture development matters to the money handlers, then it matters to all businesses, right? Yeah. And a lot has changed in the financial world in the last decade. The global crash impacted public trust in the financial sector, which led to increased regulation.
Yeah, it did. And what's really interesting to notice here is that in the wake of the 2008, the regulatory bodies attempted to ensure that financial institutions maintained good practice. But a study done by PwC and the London Business School in 2015 reported that a get-tough approach and poor performance in financial services is creating a climate of fear, and that anxiety disrupts people's capacity to make good decisions. And so it was leading them to behave less ethically. So this is a significant insight, because it's pointing out to us that too much focus on potentially limiting values, such as control, will create a fearful climate, and fearful people make worse decisions. So allowing an unhealthy culture to continue, that's actually setting your organization up to potentially fail ethically, or at least over time to suffer a performance decline.
Now, could we look at global organization?
Yes, yeah. Sorry, Sujana. So in the global context, you know, it's more, the world is so complex today, and change is our constant, and so the ability to make healthy decisions is significantly important, and anything that weakens the human capacity for good decision making, that's worth addressing. So so looking at this in an international perspective, let's take the example of PwC, who I like to tell their story, because they don't just talk it, they actually walk it. So let me put a slide on.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah. How did the cultural transformation happen there? Let us know.
Yeah. So what's great about them is they've actually walked the talk. Between 2014 and 2016, they took a data-driven method to arrive at core values and bring them to life. And it was a really practical journey that was owned by the leadership. So on the slide, you can see this journey, and it began with them looking at, you know, their context, recognizing demographic and social change in their market, as well as environmental factors like climate, global politics, technology breakthroughs, rapid urbanization. And they analyzed all sorts of data and concluded that organizations that focus on values, not focusing on rules, perform better. And this analysis identified data such as 97% of employees in a purpose-led, values-driven organization, they report high performance, whereas only 30% of employees in organizations that are driven by power and task report high performance. And they also analyzed that S&P stock market data of the 500 firms which represent the overall stock market. They took that analysis further and looked at purpose, and found that purpose-driven firms make about 14 times more profit over 15 years. So what's interesting to note about PwC is that, having made all of these data-driven sort of conclusions, they all aligned, and then they're an organization made up of national partnerships who are independent companies but through a partnership, but they all aligned on the importance of creating a unified way of working if PwC itself was going to fulfill its vision. So what, you know, they all got behind a recognition, and even published a report about this, that a focus on both profit and purpose generates long-term profitability, long-term sustainability, and long-term positive impact on the world around them. So so having done this, they took their own journey forward, and they learned to, walk the talk, live their purpose and their core values.
Yeah. And so how did they develop their core values? What was the process? They did it right.
Yeah. So they asked their clients and their regulators, but they also did a Barrett Values survey of their entire global workforce to understand their people and identify where the energy was in the organization. They got a 58% response rate from 156 countries, and that meant that they knew what their people wanted and what their people needed, that meant they could connect with what mattered most to their employees, and they could facilitate active, engaged, authentic involvement with purpose and release the potential of the organization. So the last time I was in their offices was 2018. It was May. It was a beautiful sunny day, and it was the joy of seeing how these people and hearing the stories of how they're living their values. So I heard stories of their partners, even at partner level, holding each other to account. So it may be that they're running very profitable businesses, but if there was behavior that was not aligned to values, it was addressed. And that sends such a powerful message to a whole organization. And I was seeing the staff workshops and games and materials and activities, all of the usual stuff you would imagine, but it was very creative and it was very accountable.
Yeah. And what was the key question here?
Yeah, so that they walk their talk. So as an illustration, they commentate on the importance of culture, but having understood it, they then took that journey genuinely.
Yeah. Okay, so we have in a chat box a small suggestion that the presenter view of PPT is shared. You might consider sharing another screen.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Thank you for the suggestion, people. Let me put it on the right screen so that you can see it better. So we're looking for that one. That must have been the glitch of when it threw me out, because it was set up right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, and it was a nice journey for PwC, but in this case study, people used measurement. What type of measurement did they use? Can you tell more about it?
Yeah, okay, definitely. So in all of the work that I've been involved in with culture development, there's always been some element of measurement, and most of you will know that there's three types of measurement. There's KPIs that are leading, they're predictive of what's going to happen in the future, they're live about what's happening now, or they're lagging about what's happened. And a lot of what we look at as managers is lagging indicators, because they're a report on what's happened. Organizations sometimes have great strategy maps, which will show progress towards outcomes, which are slightly predictive, but I don't often see, it's increasing, but it's been, it needs more, it's needed more measures that show culture in the normal business reporting, because it is such a predictive indicator of sustained high performance. And these measurements that can tell you about the values of your people and what they're experiencing, and what the desired culture needs to move towards to really engage and motivate those people. Which makes it the predeterminant of performance. So I've, as you know, as a former director of Barrett Values Centre, I'm very familiar, of course, with those products, and this is a special expertise area of yours, Sujana. So just to talk about the Barrett Values assessment products briefly, they do allow so much in terms of helping an organisation see the alignment of each demographic group, of what's being called for, what will motivate them, any perception gaps between departments and levels of staff, to track the changes of culture over time, and thereby sort of see the measurable result of your culture development interventions, and to see that in the context of a framework of evolution. So it's a journey. And what I'm saying with the image to go with this point is that the seas are not always smooth, and if you're a leader holding this journey in a big ocean of culture and you want to stay in the boat, measure, because you need to see what's happening, not just rely on your perceptions, but get that understanding in a way that data.
And talking about organizational culture, what what indicators of healthy or unhealthy culture we have in Barrett assessments through Barrett methodology.
Okay, and so the single most important thing is measuring alignment, and within the Barrett methodology, you can see that alignment between the personal values of who is in your organization, the cultural values that they experience at work, and the desired values in relation to your organization's vision and strategic future and goal. Where do they believe what values they believe need to be core? So so it's really alignment is very important.
Alignment matters really. But how can you see that alignment is healthy or unhealthy? Is there any other indicator that shows?
Yeah, good point. Because you don't just want alignment over a dysfunctional culture. So the model, the Barrett assessment reports will show you the measure, a measure for dysfunction. And in the Barrett model, that's called entropy. And it's a percentage figure reflecting how many potentially limiting values your people are experiencing at work. So that's really important, because that's showing you what's draining the energy from your business and blocking innovation and performance. And those reports, you can see that entropy score by any demographic group, which means you can see the cultural patterns that are creating fear-driven behavior at work. And it's things like votes for bureaucracy, silo mentality, competition, under recognition, lack of work balance. And then those signs of entropy, if you don't address them, will undermine performance and your viability. But you can address them if you can measure them and discover that they're there and see where to focus. That then helps you build the high performance and the engagement that you need. So yeah, you can get all of that from the Barrett values assessments, and it will show you what the real core values are.
Yeah, you mentioned core values. Why do we need core values actually in the organization? What do they serve for?
It's another great question. A lot of the time, the core values can sit there as laminated posters, and values are for living, not laminating, is a catchphrase a colleague used recently that I love. But the importance with core values is that they unite people. People work well together when they're united. And now we as human beings, we have core values that are deeply held, that are unique to us as individual human beings. So when we're talking about core values of an organization, we're asking to kind of find a collective agreement about what, in shorthand, of a shared meaning about how things get done around here. You could almost say that organizational core values are a sort of symbol into which an individual can project their inner core values and then engage with the group through a shared norm. So core values are really important because people align behind it, and people are more easily will engage with the actions that contribute to the organization's purpose. But to do that, they really do need to resonate. So to develop the core values, it's important to have authentic feedback from the employees, and then hold dialogues about the purpose and the values that are led by an aligned leadership team, because with that you get the buy-in. Because nothing will kill and espouse core value more quickly than incongruent behavior of a leadership if it's not addressed. And nothing will disappoint employees more than if you've asked them what their values are and then you present them with a vision of culture and values that doesn't resonate at all with what they've said, with their voice. So core values help bring that in.
And then you constantly engage people in core culture creation. So how do you justify the costs of continually engaging them?
Yeah, so historically businesses don't spend money on the communication side of inside the business. It's not, historically normal, but what you do need to do for culture development is just that. And now this is where a lot of work sort of gets stopped because it's not invested in. So what you need to do is invest a small amount of money in a culture diagnostic, and then you can use that data for building the business case for all these conversations that we're talking about. So for example, if a value survey shows lots of votes for limiting values like bureaucracy, confusion, empire building, information hoarding, you've got a high entropy score then. And if you ask staff, how much time do you think you spend in situations related to those values? And then you take that estimate, a rough estimate, and calculate what of that time times their salary line. And then see what it's adding to the bottom line. Now, if that's only 10% accurate, it's often enough, more than enough, to justify the investment in culture development. So there's an organisation, a real case, where a firm had an annual income of 33 million, was making a loss that year of 500,000, and they estimated, they did work with staff, and this is a story often shared by Phil Clothier, who worked with this organisation, and they did work with the staff, and they came up with it costing them 13.5 million. If that figure's only 10% right, it's enough. It's enough to say there's a case for business to look at culture.
And then comes the real question, and which is, who is in charge of cultivating organizational culture?
Well, we all know the stock answer here is culture is led from the top. So let's dig into the importance of this point. So I like the words of Peters and Waterman in Search of Excellence, where they clarify it with, it is recognized that those organizations that are great to work with have core values that are clear and rigidly upheld, which have flowed from the founder. So that's their conclusion in all their work in Search for Excellence. And yes, I do think that leadership exists everywhere in the organization, real leadership. And I also believe that the culture of an organization itself is an emergent property of the way every human being in that workplace engages. But I still hold there that there is a real importance of recognizing that the top team leadership is the most significant role in the creation of company culture, because whether or not they want to be, they are defining the rules of the game for everyone else. And as the glass ceiling, if you like, or the ceiling of what's possible for the organization. So if you look at the words on the slide there, yes, so culture is an emergent property of the group. The top leaders either limit or grow the space for that emergence by who they're being.
Yeah.
The cultural leadership actually requires nothing less than owning the vision and walking the talk. And you don't have to do anything brilliantly as long as that is genuine. There are lots of ideas, we can come on to that, but if that's genuine, then you have it. And there are many other sort of roles that matter. So I don't want to discredit the HR directors, who are the gatekeeper, the head of culture, who work in the pockets of projects to transfer the approach until it gets traction and buy-in as a real difference maker. All the ambassadors and champions of culture change, the program leaders that knit it all together, they matter too. And the key role of the top leader is the bit that changes it if it's going to become a whole organization-wide and be sustained.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Once I heard that, I knew of an organization where the CEO said that they did not need to involve any staff in culture transformation below the leadership level. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say that it's how far do they want to go and how fast. So the African saying is to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. And the story, which people may have heard before, of when NASA was putting man on the moon, and President Nixon went to speak to the people in the building. He spoke to someone in the corridor wearing a sort of janitorial work suit, and he said to the man, "And what do you do here?" And the man said, "I'm putting man on the moon." Now that achievement was unprecedented. It was far and it was fast. So it's really, if they don't want to involve all of their employees in being on board with where everyone's going, that's going to be a drag factor that slows down where they're going. Yeah.
And then how can leaders help culture to evolve? That's right. The other question.
Yeah. So given there's a commitment to it and there's a readiness for it, practical tips: understand the business case for cultural development. So we've talked about that a bit already today, and then share the results with your C-suite or your leadership team and explore your own alignment as a group around those results and who you're going to be and what you're going to do to lead that culture. So understanding what the role is of leading culture as the CEO, as the top team. And that may also include having support for your individual leadership, self-awareness, congruence and action, and perhaps having a coach, which is a great idea because every one of us has blind spots. We're all only human. And then I would say there's a need to build a compelling reason for change and to establish a strong leadership board, program management office and communications team that can share those messages about the compelling reason for change in language that works for each section of your organization. And then maybe put in place support for your team, your management teams, about how the middle management, how do they genuinely get pass on messages and support their people at the point when the people are affected by the opportunities to get engaged. Who do they need to be as managers listening to that group? So it might be that there's some management development. And then lastly, I would say stay committed to the process for at least 2 years and provide resources for all the stuff that underpins it, all the interventions and materials and all of that sort of thing. So that's all in the leadership role, that piece.
Yeah, and in my consultancy work, I often see that there is a gap between leadership perspective and employee experience. How will we know that?
Sure. So as we talked about this in preparing today, it's not how will we know it. It's not is there a gap. It's there is a gap. We know enough about human nature, neuroscience, relational dynamics, internal politics. We know enough about this in the sciences of management these days to be fairly certain that a typical employee will perceive the organization's culture differently to the leader unless there is, for whatever reason, already a strongly congruent culture in that organization. So the issue isn't is there a gap, it's how do you understand that gap, what the shape of that gap, and then bridge it and never step over it. And you need to create safe ways for employees to have their voice and have those perceptions be identified and assessed. Again, the Barrett Values Assessment tool will do this for you. I've mentioned the importance of alignment across the organization between personal values and corporate values, but this is about the vertical alignment between employees and leaders and finding a way to see the different ways that the culture is understood at those levels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So if there are some messages or lessons for leaders, what could they be?
Yeah. So if you want to be here tomorrow, adapt today by being the kind of leader who can ask people what they need and act on the response. So this is really my message, and that you need to be saying, how can I be the best leader I can be for this organization so that this organization can be the best it can be for the world. And I thank Tor Eneroth for introducing me to those phrases in my early days in training with BBC. The importance of this is that thriving can occur when the top team are allowing and encouraging evolution, but by genuinely engaging in questions about who they're being, not just what they're doing, and by courageously acting on the answers that get revealed, and allowing and supporting the dialogue loops in their organization. So the lesson here is to thrive, leaders need to be adapting their leadership style so that the way things get done can actually evolve by adaptive structure being built into the organization that generates aligned culture. And because culture is not a product, you can't create it in a think tank, in a product development program. And also you can't copy it. It's why culture is the ultimate competitive advantage, because it's unique. It's the emergent property of a human system. So the best culture is built when dialogue loops are led by authentic leaders who act with congruent action. Because this is how leaders release the full potential of the organization.
Yeah. And sometimes we see unsuccessful cultural transformation. We all talk about cultural transformation, we want to change. But why do organizations fail in managing organizational culture? What is your perspective?
Yeah, so we've heard the statistics from the McKinsey report decades ago that 75% of change management projects fail. And we've seen lots of evidence and stories over the years, and it does seem that it's the main reasons are lack of courage or lack of knowledge or lack of commitment. So a lack of courage is about not having the readiness for difficult conversations about new ways of working, and maybe addressing the individual involvement in personal development. The lack of knowledge is, these days the research shows that most leaders do recognise the importance of culture, but are less clear about how to manage it. So there's a need there to work with consultants in this field to bring that expertise into your organisation if you need it. And the lack of commitment is often a result, it can be a result of the first two things actually, because of not understanding the business case or not really wanting to change. Yeah. So
and you mentioned, sorry. So you mentioned in the slide the lack of tools. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, so that's diagnostic tools really. So we talked about the assessment tools because, as I said before, don't just rely on what you perceive and are told, but get real data about the culture. And then when you've got it, actively sponsor it. So make sure that the data is reviewed in a way that's facilitated for understanding by your board and by the cross-departmental team to start to get real recognition of what it's telling you, what you're seeing. Then I think as well, other tools are important things about supporting a leader with how to hold each other to account. And as a team talking, spending time creating agreement about how you'll hold each other to account in a way that's constructive for your greatest good collectively and individually. And it's in the spirit of continuous learning and development. So, and there can also maybe be skills training there about handling dysfunction, recognition for courage, conversations that return back to integrity. How do you do them? What are the steps? And management development programs for conversational skills, and for understanding the normal resistance to change and how to handle and support people going through change curves, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned resistance to change. Why do employees, including leaders, resist to change in cultural transformation process?
So it's natural. That's the basic answer. It's a survival instinct. We've evolved this way. Neuroscience is now giving this the label of familiarity bias. Basically, the idea is that our brains prefer things we're familiar with, because if we know what to expect, we're more likely to survive. So we just don't like the unknown because it's high risk. And then another thing is to recognize that we are social and we're also autonomous. So we like to be engaged with what's going on, but we also like to feel a degree of control or fairness. So people need to feel a degree of fairness to accept the new rules and that, or the new request for a new way of being in an organization. So it can sometimes be that a just lack of communication about what is happening, the program, can in fact cause resistance to it. Just because it feels imposed instead of explained. And then another factor is that sometimes people in the system are quite happy with the way it is because currently they understand the game and they've got power in the system and they don't want it to change. So those sort of reasons, they're typical resistance to, and they can all be categorized as forces for stability. There are also forces for change. And I've mentioned one of them before, the compelling vision. So you can look into communicating that in ways that make it visceral, visual, tangible, have a blueprint of what the future is going to be like, do testing and acceptance work and get people involved in that, and make it clear what the consequences are for not engaging in the new ways of working. So without that going too far down that road and creating a climate of fear, of course. But this starts to make it clear that there's an entire program of initiatives that need investment. Hope to move forward on the culture program. So.
Yeah, but we have decided to be on this path and want to improve. And then there is a question how to align culture with organization, vision, and mission.
Yeah. So in terms of aligning, just to, I love this little picture of the ants because basically their antennae are touching. There's feedback. And that's the core of it. So With creating alignment, leaders, I've mentioned before with the PwC story, hold an authentic inquiry into the purpose and walk the talk. So this is what I'm saying, is that leaders need to understand what's core to them. They need to explore their individual passion and authentic reason, and then their authentic team reason for being the leaders of that organization in that purpose. Then refine that into a strategy and craft the vision and mission. And once that's done, you can then take the wider engagement and embedding piece of what are the values that we need to live here to realize this vision, and who are we as a wider population. And through that, you can build the alignment. And there are 4 main types of alignment that all need to be considered to create a whole systems culture development program. Your personal alignment, which is the congruence of leaders. The structural alignment, which is everything to do with encouraging what you want to be lived, onboarding, induction, talent management, management development. Then you've got your values alignment, which is actually time and process for people who work in your organization to imbue the values as felt and acted on, and explore their own values in relation to the shared values at work. And then lastly, kind of brings it full circle really, the mission alignment is about maintaining all of this, because you're ensuring that decision making is consciously taken in line with core values and the vision, and reviewing performance outcomes in the context of the new purpose, vision and values, so that and checking that performance management aligns everyone's individual objectives to reflect those vision and values.
Yeah, and we mentioned the leadership role as a critical role for cultural transformation, but if you're talking about individuals, how does each employee affect cultural change?
So everyone is dynamically interconnected through being part of a living network that creates a collective culture. And in each one of us is then, we've got our individual mindset, our personal and professional motivations and values and beliefs, and some of which we may not even be aware of. And at work, we all have reactions to events, and we hold stories and judgments and opinions about those events. And that in turn influences the actions we take, and that in turn becomes patterned into the culture of the organization as a whole.
So the fact is that each employee affects cultural change.
Yeah, we do. We're a part of the system. So, and if you want the whole organization to change, it's as touched on before, it's wise to invite every individual to take the journey together so that the collective culture can adapt, because it adapts one person at a time, but it is also a living system. So it's dynamic. What makes a big difference though is if people can have that opportunity to reflect on their values. And I think with the way things are in the world now, particularly, we've all done a lot of that with lockdown, and in work now, I think we've got to continue that conversation because people need to. And from that, you can co-create the compelling way forward.
Yeah, and now we are in a specific situation. We are actually in a second year of pandemic. So what can you share today about the wider picture of cultural development now? What really matters to people right now?
It's, in my personal opinion, something that matters a lot to people is choice. We've been impacted by things beyond our control, and our everyday freedom and lives and social patterns and work patterns have been changed. So I'm noticing a lot in HR communities that there's conversations about whether employees should be asked to stay at home or return, and the emerging consensus seems to be some sort of hybrid. And I would just suggest that it's also important to involve employees where operationally possible in a choice about where and how they return to work, because with a choice, there's that autonomy is a type of motivation. By having a choice, there will be a bigger sense of autonomy over a situation that's been causing us all a lot of stress. And the more autonomy we can have in this situation, then the more engagement is likely to come as a result. I'd also say it's a huge opportunity at this time to move forward with employees in a more powerful way, because some of the changes have been popular with employees. So increased workplace flexibility and more care being shown for their well-being. I think people would like to see this continue in their workplaces. And we can see evidence of this from the highlights of a global survey conducted by the Barrett Values Centre, comparing values before and after the COVID period, and what employees would like to carry forward into the new normal is this desire to be responsive to the environment and find better ways of doing things. So in particular, what seems to be being called for are the values of adaptability, agility, digital connectivity, information sharing, and work-life balance. So a shared sense of identity in our workplaces, maybe. Maybe it's about an opportunity for us to reconnect and re-establish what's normal for us, and to move forward with cultural development by recognizing what's changed and restoring any equality that needs restoring, and providing leaders with development support for how to handle such uncertainty. But practical work to restore cohesion, to align people, and to keep that renewed alignment alive as the organization moves forward together.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jay. Soon we will be over with this session, but before that, I really have to thank you for sharing these insights with us. And now I'm inviting you, participants, to post your questions in the Q&A section, and let's see if there are any of them already. Yeah, there is one. What is the cultural disruption in a pandemic environment?
So thank you. I think I was sort of speaking to this just now in a way, but our sense of social cohesion has been distorted. And with that, our familiar sense of shared identity and our workplaces and our social lives. And so much of what happens in how human beings treat each other and how organizations are high performing or low performing comes down to what we identify with and what we don't identify with. So I think it is important to take action to address any inequalities and by processes that allow reconnecting, making sure that everybody can be included in that and be a part of it, to re-establish what feels normal for us in organizations so that we can re-identify with what we're taking forward and contribute again in a collective way. Personally, I've noticed that the last year is teaching us to accept, maybe, I want to use the word death, in the way that things have endings and beginnings. Because there's obviously been real literal death and loss. There's also been such a significant change to what we consider to be normal. But with this death comes the gift of life. If you embrace the transformation from how things were to how things are. So we all need some kindness for the grief we feel, and we all need some practical work to restore cohesion and to unite us in shared values moving forward. And actually, I must just mention that's the theme of this year's World Values Day, which you can find online.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. And there is another question. How can we identify and manage motivational drivers of people within organization?
Great, yes. So there's many theories of motivation. You've got self-determination theory, psychological well-being theory, PERMA model, eudaimonic well-being, and many more. But these models are consistent with the 7-level model that is behind the Barrett Values Assessment results. So you get your results in this developmental framework, which evolved by Richard Barrett some 20 to 25 years ago now, drawing on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and expanding self-actualization, and has since been validated by these models that I mentioned earlier as really showing us what it is that people want and therefore how they're motivated. So the Barrett model behind the Barrett analytics tools is itself a pathway of human flourishing with a sort of 3-part framework of the physical, your viability, the evolution, embracing autonomy, and the fulfillment of collaboration with others. So you can use that tool. You can use that tool because it's there. It's a great way system for understanding what motivates your employees.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay, for answering these questions. And now comes the time to depart. But before we do that, what is it that we should remember about the culture?
There's so much I've shared today. I think it's the way things get done, and it's predictive. Pay attention to it. It's ultimately the only unique competitive advantage your organisation has. And not only that, it's the real journey. We want to live our values. We want to contribute. As you evolve and mature in this life, you move through to wanting collaboration and contribution. And if you do your culture development journey, your organisation will have its purpose and profit fulfillment.
Yes.
So
thank you.
you
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we are nearly at the end of the session, and I want to thank you all for your participation at this webinar. I hope we have addressed the relevant questions on culture that occupy business these days. This was actually a reminder for all of us to keep the focus and take care of what really matters to our people, to listen, to be restorative and patient on transformational path. But first measure in order to manage. And we will support you and guide you through this process with our knowledge and expertise as well. That's why I'm inviting you once again to keep asking at the post-event link that you can find in a chat box in a second. This is a workspace that we have created for you to continue the dialogue on cultural transformation. And this link will stay open until Monday noon. And Jay and myself will be happy to answer your questions there. And also the slides from today's presentation will be posted there for you to download them. And we hope to continue everything we started today. So if there are no more questions, I would once again thank you, wish you a good day in health and joy. Goodbye, and hopefully see you soon with new topics on board. Jay, anything from you?
Thank you. Go well, everyone. Thank you for being here. And please join us in the portal. We'll be happy to connect there and answer any questions.